Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon, speaking from our Bronx studio. It is October 26, approximately 4 p.m., and obviously we wanted to talk a little bit about what happened at Cooper Union, something that we're seeing happening at universities across this nation, and that we are seeing in cities and towns across this nation. We are seeing an attempt to silence opposition, and we are seeing a group of individuals to force their political partisan ideology onto others and to threaten them, to attack them, if they dare to have any other kind of opinion. This is dangerous. This is a precedent that is not new in America, but needs to stop, and we need to call this out. And we've been trying to do that on this channel. We're going to try again today. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention, if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience. We do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to try and hear your voice from anywhere in the world, because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your right to speak about the issues that are affecting us all. So this Sunday, we hope you will join us and our entire global audience, whether the internet overlords like it or not, whether your government likes it or not. We want to hear your voice on all of these issues. So in the last several days, and obviously since October 7th, when Hamas, the government of the Gaza Strip, decided to unilaterally attack civilians, to kill babies, to commit an attempted act of genocide and outright absolute terrorism. Since they have done that, and some 1,500 individuals, the number seems to grow. We're not sure what it is. It's well over 1,300 individuals, civilians, were killed. Women and children and innocent civilians killed. Hundreds, we are not even clear, hundreds at the least of individuals from around the globe, including Americans, were taken hostage. By the way, Americans were killed as well. Individuals from Britain, from Germany, from around the world were killed as part of those 1,300. But we know that there's at least somewhere between 10 to 14 American hostages, possibly more, we're not clear, along with 200 others from around the world have been taken as hostage in human shields. These are the facts. They are indisputable. There is no question. There is no spin on this, and there is no justification for it. And yet, we have heard over and over again from groups like BLM, the Democratic Socialists of America, many of the colleges throughout this nation, the far left have sought to try and find ways to justify this attempt at genocide, and we find that appalling and unacceptable, and we denounce it vehemently. But here's the thing. When we continue to see that the highest institutions of our government, of our nation, are continuing to support this attempt at genocide, this atrocity, then we see that people are silenced, and the very next thing that happens, well, it's real simple. The next thing that happens is violence. When we do not have an appropriate response to this, when we do not just say that we are outraged, but demand that action is taken equivalent to that outrage, then we see what is happening now. It's very simple. The Biden administration and many of the governments around the world are currently in the process of trying to provide humanitarian aid, as they call it, to Gaza Strip, to the people of Palestine, which goes through the government of Palestine. At some step, no matter which NGO, whatever organization you want to say is going to be involved, at some point, the Palestinian government, Hamas, will be involved, and they will siphon off those resources. If they don't directly take those resources at gunpoint, which they have done consistently in the history that Hamas has been in charge of the Gaza Strip. Let's focus and slow down, because this isn't something that is new. We've heard and seen this happen before, with Jerry Nadler as he denied the existence of Antifa. And then Antifa turned around in that silence, in that vacuum where the major media denounced anyone who claimed Antifa existed, and then self-proclaimed members of Antifa murdered. Citizens, people saw a problem. They confronted that problem, said, Antifa is wrong. It is a terrorist organization. It should be stopped. The leadership, Jerry Nadler, Democrats, the mainstream news media said, that doesn't exist. Stop talking about it. And then, emboldened by this support, tacit support, we saw that they went about committing autonomous zones, which are insurrectionist, violating every local, state, and federal law in the land. They burned down cities like Minneapolis, costing billions of dollars and destroying people's lives for decades. And they actively killed individuals. How about we don't go that far? How about something else? Let's take a look at, what about in 2019? Talking about colleges, talking about free speech. Here we go. We had students at Binghamton University go out and they were talking about their support of Donald Trump, their support of a more conservative government. And what happened? The left, the members of the far left at Binghamton University, spurred by the leadership at Binghamton University, mobbed 3 students. It was 3 students saying they support Trump, and 200 of the far left surrounded these students, including members of Binghamton City Council, joined in to threaten and intimidate and to coerce these students into silence. And that was then followed up at a speaking event, which was overtaken by the Loca Antifa, an organization called Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, and they usurped a speech by Dr. Art Laffer and shut it down. Again, silence is then followed by acts very often of violence. And we talked about this more than a little bit. I mean, recently we've talked about the reaction that we've had to Hamas, to Harvard, to Tufts University. We followed that up, talking about more recently about the fact that free speech is dead, that we are seeing in college after college across America, you cannot speak about any idea that is not approved ahead of time. And the fact that YouTube and the White House and social media are colluding together in time for the 2024 election to fortify that election by silencing individuals, by denying them their First Amendment rights, their free speech. And each and every time that we have seen this happen, we've then seen the next thing that follows. More and more violence. And when we were speaking about this in a short just last night, we are seeing individuals, because of this lack of free speech, because people are not allowed to say that Hamas is a terrorist organization and should not be given any kind of support, because there is a war that is going on and we are aiding and abetting the actual aggressors of that war. That is Hamas. That is a fact. That's something that you have never seen before. As we said in the short, that's something unheard of. You would never give resources to Genghis Khan as he was conquering the world. You wouldn't give resources to Germany as it's trying to eliminate Jews and pretty much everyone in the world in the 1930s, World War II. You wouldn't have gone into Cambodia, the killing fields, and given them more resources to kill more people, or in China under Chairman Mao and his Red Plague. How about Che Guevara killing gays in Cuba? Look at each and every one of these atrocities. Look at Venezuela right now. Would we give Venezuela more resources as it forces its own people to starve to death, to be shot by the communist government of Venezuela? Do we want to give them more resources? By the way, the answer to that is yes, the Biden-Harris administration is in fact doing that. They have actually reversed their position, and they're giving more resources to the communist government in Venezuela so that they can continue to oppress their people who are starving and evacuating Venezuela faster than ever before. In fact, they are now the largest group of illegal aliens entering the United States as a result. Why? Because there was a vacuum of information. We stopped talking about Venezuela. That no longer became an approved subject to speak about. It's like Afghanistan. It's not an approved subject to speak about, as 5,000 Americans remain abandoned in that country, and at least 200 Americans are being tortured as we speak by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's just news that doesn't help Democrats get elected. It's unapproved messages, not that it's unverified. This is verified internationally, but it's not approved to talk about. So they throw it out the window. Same thing in the Ukraine, where 10,000 Americans were abandoned. We don't talk about that anymore. The 15,000 Americans in the Sudan at this moment who continue to be abandoned by the Biden-Harris administration, that was just in April. We don't talk about that anymore. Why? It doesn't help Democrats. It is not an approved message. The White House does not want social media to talk about this, and therefore it is censored and suppressed. And now we have what's happening in Israel and with Hamas. And we already see that the news media is doing its very best to shift the messaging. And we see this from the colleges, to shift the messaging, to stop talking about Hamas. They won't even mention Hamas in much of their wording. They're trying to silence the opposition. And every time they try to silence the opposition, we see as a result more violence and more danger. So let me explain what I mean by that. Because you may say, well, Mike, I don't understand. That's not exactly correct. Let's go to the New York Times. Yesterday in Cooper Union, a college here in downtown Manhattan, New York City. One of multiple colleges. As a matter of fact, before I even get to that, let me mention that Cooper Union is much like most of the colleges in New York State. If we go to the 2024 College Free Speech Rankings, and which is the most recent poll done by students on their ability to speak freely about whatever subject, doesn't matter, left, right, center, it doesn't matter. Their ability to comfortably be able to speak and express themselves is horrendous, especially if you look at New York State. Now, we know Harvard is the bottom of the barrel for free speech, number 248 out of 248 colleges. But looking at New York State, which has 19 colleges that were on this survey, and looking at that, 2/3 of the colleges in New York State are below average, not just average, below average, if not lower. In fact, almost a third of all of the colleges in New York on this survey actually are in the bottom 200 of 248 colleges in terms of free speech. Free speech is being silenced. That's at private institutions and public institutions. So it doesn't come as a surprise when we find out that Cooper Union, in the center of this, not far away from the Democratic Socialists of America when they were protesting in October 9th, when they were protesting on September 9th, as we were finding out the initial numbers of the attack, the terrorist attack on Israel, they were out cheering Hamas, the Democratic Socialists of America. Cooper Union's very close to where that protest was happening. And we see what happened there. What happened there? Well, according to what we see from the Wall Street Journal, well, it was really simple. There was a protest by pro-Israel students, Jewish students, came out and said, there are hostages that are being held by Hamas, being used as human shields. And you're asking us to support the use of hostages. First, the fact that they took hostages, and secondly, the fact that these hostages are being used as human shields as they are being abused. This doesn't make sense. Why would we want to support that? On the other side were the protesters for Hamas. individuals who said, no, Hamas is beautiful, wonderful, great, and we need to support it. Israel is the bad guy. This is straight out of what we heard from Harvard College. It doesn't make sense when you think of the context. It doesn't make sense when we are looking at the facts that are in front of us at this time. But according to the Wall Street Journal, the students, the pro-Israel students, the pro-free hostages, those students left. They went inside the Cooper Union building. They went to the library. They ended their protest and went on with their lives. And the pro-Hamas protesters who wanted to silence them, who wanted to shut their voices down, came in after them and intimidated them. They threatened them. And we can only take it that way when we understand that when the students, the Jewish students, went into the library, the security who were being pushed aside, the security, fearing for the safety of those students, locked them in the library. Now, it's been reported as they were being barricaded, but they weren't barricaded. They were locked in for their safety, to protect them from the pro-Hamas supporters. They had to be locked into a room to separate those groups. Not because the Jewish students, the pro-Israel students, had gone out and attacked anyone. They didn't. They voiced their opinion. And on a college campus in New York State, you really can't do that. Now, this is just one opinion. This is coming from the New York Times. You can also go to CBS News with the latest report from the NYPD saying, no, there were police there. They didn't stop anyone from doing anything. In fact, there are reports, depending on the news agency, that says that the New York City police were not allowed into the Cooper Union building, even though they were witnessing this attempt to intimidate, this attempt to coerce and silence voices, which would seem to be anti-Semitic and violate several of New York City's codes and New York State's regulations on equal opportunity and fairness. That being said, but what we do know is New York City, even the police, even CBS admit this was unprovoked. But if you look at the further left you go, you see that, what does the Daily Beast, they say, Cooper Union pro-Israel students locked in a library during a tense protest. They minimize what was going on. Even they couldn't hide the fact that the Jewish students had to be protected from the pro-Hamas protesters, that there was a threat. And the threat, regardless of how they want to title it, it wasn't coming from pro-Israel, it wasn't coming from the Jewish students, it was coming from the pro-Hamas protesters. It was coming from those who support genocide and terrorism. And again, depending on which news source you want to go to, you can go to Daily Beast, you can go to CBS, you can go to the New York Times, you can go to the New York Post. You will see some differences, but there are certain things that are very, very consistent. That the students, the Jewish students, were not aggressors. They made their voices heard, they left, they were then aggressed against. In a microcosm, this is exactly what happened with Israel. Hamas were the aggressors. Hamas attacked the civilians. Hamas is using human shields. Hamas is preventing the rest of the Palestinian people from getting fuel and water because they are diverting those resources to continue to fight against Israel. And we're seeing the same thing in their supporters, whether it be the Democratic Socialists of America, whether it be BLM, whether it be at the colleges, whether that college is Harvard or Tufts, Cornell, Binghamton University, or now in the Cooper Union. We're seeing the same thing. This is about free speech. And what we see in each and every case, the moment that we are silencing voices that are unapproved, that have a message that doesn't match what some elites want to say, it is followed up by violence. Now, I know someone's going to say, but Mike, it wasn't violent. They were just banging on windows. They were just screaming anti-Semitic words at those students. They were only banging on the doors. They didn't actually physically touch those Jewish students. And what if that security guard didn't lock the door? What if they got through the door? They broke through that door. They broke through that glass wall. What would have happened then? See, that's a very important question. They didn't get violent physically because they couldn't. Because some quick-witted security guards, not the New York police, who theoretically were there and did nothing and let this happen. No. The security guard at Cooper Union protected those students as best they could. And that's the reason why there wasn't violence. But the pro-Hamas supporters were looking to silence them. And it would seem that they were more than willing to use intimidation, coercion. It was definitely banging on the windows and doors and screaming at them for 20 minutes and shouting epithets at them. That sure as hell seems to be a threat of physical violence as well. This is something people could be arrested for. They won't be. They haven't been. This is going to pass by because the news media wants to silence it. Why? Because the left-leaning news media, the left of the United States, the progressive left of the United States, supports Hamas. Not Israel, not the people of Israel, not the people around the world who are being held as hostages and human shields. They support genocide and Iran to force their authoritarian views on the rest of the world. I keep saying, in this coverage since October 7th, we have been saying over and over again, if they are willing to support acts of terror, acts of genocide, declarations of genocide, and the attempt to carry out that genocide, as Hamas has done, that is what they have stood for. They believe in the genocide of Israel, and by the way, the United States. Then, if you support that, what will you do in the United States when you come to power? I keep asking this question, and it's more and more important. We see this with the students at Harvard, the students at Cooper Union. We see that at students at Cornell University. We are seeing these groups of individuals who want to become our political leaders, our industry leaders, and they all support the use of absolute terror and violence and threats, first to silence their opposition, and then, as happens in every case in history, once there is silence, they then use violence. And we're seeing that play out right now. This is terrifying. This is how Kristallnacht took place. Because a group of people were silenced, and then violence was used against them. We have seen this over and over again, whether it's in China with the growth of the communist movement, whether it's in Russia, Germany, Venezuela, over and over again. And we're seeing it here in the United States. The beacon of freedom in the world. Or at least we used to be. Because as we have shown, the free speech is now under direct threat. And I know everyone wants to look at what's happening with the speaker race. People want to talk about what's happening with the MILF Manor and the housewives of wherever and your local sports team. And that's the thing that's capturing most people's attention. But this is going to determine our future. This is critical. You want to tell me that Israel isn't perfect? I'll tell you, you're right. They're not. You want to tell me that capitalism isn't the perfect governmental system, or democracy is not a perfect system? I agree with you. But there isn't something better to replace it with. And silencing those that say, but you don't have a better option, silencing those that say the systems you're offering, socialism, communism, authoritarianism, are less desirable, both historically and currently, that isn't a justification for violence. That's not a reason why we should allow that to happen. I don't know. It feels like you're shouting into the wind, and shout I will, because some may hear this. We have a problem in America. If the future leaders of America believe, even a portion of them, believe that genocide, terrorism, and violence is absolutely okay, that to silence those who have different ideas and feelings than them, that they can do anything they want to do so, is terrifying. That is a recipe for, well, civil war. That is a recipe for disaster. And we need to call this out. What happened at Cooper Union should never have gotten to this point. Same thing with what we're seeing with Harvard. Same thing that we've seen with Cornell. Same thing at Binghamton University. We've seen this pattern. We know what's coming next. We need to stop before it happens. But that's what we think. What do you think?
Obey and believe.
Hell no! I'm happy to be here with you today. Understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about. Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee has no idea what she's talking about.
You can meet a very, very stringent accuracy rate when it's important, when it matters, like in federal elections.